Hello, everyone. Welcome to a fireside chat about the future of FedRAMP. My name is Ala Seifert, and I do public sector and regulated industries, public policy here at Amazon Web Services. Also proud GSA alumna. And I'm here today with Eric Mill. He's the executive director for cloud strategy at the GSA. And if you're gathered in this room, you know why that's extremely important. He joins us. Previously, he was at the Office of Management and Budget, where he was the senior advisor to the federal CIO. Before that, he was in industry, and prior to that, he was also at the GSA. So Eric has been a consummate public servant, really focusing on the excellence and imperative of getting security right to get government access to innovative technology. And so today we'll be chatting a bit about where he sees the program going, and this is going to be a forward-looking, not very tactical. You've seen a lot of folks talk about the premise of the program as it stands, and we're going to hear from Eric as a member of the administration, but also in his capacity as a subject matter expert on the topic about where things will go from here.
Thanks for the kind intro. Appreciate it. And yeah, it's a new title and position on cloud strategy. It is about 90% FedRAMP focused. And so my role there is really to help see through the modernization effort that's going on around FedRAMP that I think is pretty visible from just about every branch of government at this point. So yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So looking back at the last decade, the program's a bit over 10 years old. What do you think has made the program so useful or so sticky? I think we've all seen government programs come and go. Why has this one been the thing that stuck around?
Yeah, it is interesting. When I was at OMB, I was internally I was fond of saying that the FedRAMP memo from 2011, at least on the tech and cybersecurity side, seemed to maybe be the most impactful memo objectively OMB has put out there in terms of just creating something out of whole cloth that has really stuck, as you said. I think some of that is pretty straightforward. I think folks have seen that in this room, that it came about at a time when the government wasn't really taking much advantage of computing infrastructure at the scale and fungibility and automatability that the rest of the world was beginning to enjoy at quite a bit of speed and scale. And a lot of, I think, the early decisions that were made around FedRAMP was optimizing for please get these things into government. Like, we need to be able to have these cool things too. We need to be able to move at the speed that people expect us, the public expects. So, and that was it was not only where the market was moving, it was very much what government needed at the time. It made a lot of sense to people. It also took, I think, some of the lived experiences that were happening in different agencies, right? Each agency is doing its own interesting kind of negotiations and expressing its priorities and risks that it needs to cover down on to all the vendors and in their own way. And that stuff still happens, obviously, but having a program like FedRAMP there brings there is a place that GSA, OMB, others, where they can actually start to see in a holistic way, like, what is happening? What are people complaining about as a result of this? And what are people starting to complain less about? Where are the trends going? It pulls that stuff together into a place. I think people found that very compelling.
Do you think that the creation of the marketplace website was a useful moment in sort of a program legitimization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it took something that, while it's not the most, rocket science concept, it's something, nothing's ever so simple behind government, behind the walls, to actually pull stuff together, say something, put people in government get very antsy about putting companies' names of any form on the web. So, cutting back to that time in the FedRAMP program's life, it certainly was a significant thing to do.
Great, thank you. And so that's the last decade. Moving toward the following decade. So you're in a new role. It's very forward-leaning. It's very thinking about the future. What do you see in the coming decade for the program?
Yeah, once again, right? There's things that have been happening over the last 5-10 years that have been, I think, very obvious in the outside world. They're even obvious inside government, but we still haven't really turned the machine in that direction in a meaningful way. Right, we've done a pretty decent job now. When I joined GSA the first time, as you mentioned, a decade ago, it was still not ubiquitous, the infrastructure as a service in general. much less platform as a service. That stuff actually is, at this point, it's hard to not find that in an agency of any size in a meaningful, approved, kind of understood way. But what hasn't been tackled to nearly the same degree is software as a service, is things that you're just using out there on the web and the internet, and things that are, by their very nature, usually, and when you're not talking about a gigantic enterprise collaboration suite, usually are doing something smaller, something more focused. So there's going to be a lot more of them. And the companies are going to get a little bit smaller on average. The trade-offs are going to get different. The abstraction layers are different. And so FedRAMP has software as a service in it. It's been working on this problem for a while. But I think you can see this certainly said in the draft OMB memoranda, but I think it's obvious just viscerally to a lot of folks, that marketplace is way, way bigger than what is captured in FedRAMP right now.
The real private sector marketplace is different.
The real private sector marketplace, that's right. Yeah, in the commercial ecosystem. And these are the tools that actually are deciding how organizations work. Like, if you're deciding where to go work, the tools that are used really can change the culture and how things function there. But more directly, like just in terms of the economic engine that they represent and the acceleration that it means to have these tools, like that's where it is. This isn't a passing change. This is something that's basically, since the web was born in the late 80s and 1990s, more and more has been moving the things that are pulled in on demand from something another organization is running. And through a whole variety of technology and organizational changes that I don't need to explain to anybody in this room, that's now at the point where behind the scenes of these web pages are just, in things that ordinarily 10, 15, 20 years ago, enterprises assumed they would have to be running a copy of that themselves, right? So that change is, again, obvious to a lot of folks, but has not been strategically operationalized in the federal government. I personally think that is one of the big things that FedRAMP has to look at, and the implications of what it means to look at. Like, it necessitates a greater focus on small business. It necessitates an open-mindedness towards different ways of achieving different technical controls. It requires everything to move a lot faster, and the processes that worked when you had a few dozen organizations knocking at your door is a lot different than when you have hundreds or much less the thousands that I think we all want to see.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is you're thinking about velocity.
For sure.
And how are you thinking that this program, which, like, yes, is only a decade old, but is a decade old and has its own sort of technical debt and the manifestations that I think folks here in this room are all too familiar with. How are you thinking about shifting toward a world where everyone is moving faster?
Yeah, I'll give a couple of examples of things that the team is working through at the moment. So one, and I'll start with maybe a basic one, which is really starting to take what is working, like what can get you through the process and what you need to do, and just getting way more of that stuff to be like public, documented, clear, and there's an inherent open-mindedness to this as well, where like what we want is when we see new things come through the pipeline that are achieving some security requirement in a new way. It's really very much meeting the spirit of it, but the program's never seen this before. That is something we should be excited about, right? And not turned off by. And when we work with that to get it through the system, we should also, and this also may require a little bit of some open-mindedness in some of the companies as well. We want to be able to take those things and and make that a well-lit path for others to come through the door as well, to have achieved that security requirement in that way. One of the lines that folks in the team who are working on these kinds of acceleration initiatives talk about that I really like is trying to turn unplanned work into planned work. FedRAMP will always be work. It will always be annoying to somebody, but one of the things we can try and do is make it a lower surprise organization, right? a lower surprise process, and try to move that stuff to the left. Another example I want to mention is that we're very geared right now on empowering agile delivery, right? The way that software companies today, the higher performing ones certainly, are working and have been working really for some time, right? We don't think it's in the security interest of the FedRAMP program or the US government to be a constant bottleneck that makes it take a year longer than it should to get a firewall up on the internet or something like that, right? We want to, it is in our interest to see more security patches, features generally. It's in the government's interest for this stuff to be moving. And so, you know, that one of the big pain points that I know a lot of folks have comes around what in FedRAMP speak is the significant change request process. That's getting a lot of attention from us internally.
Raise your hand if you know what a CR is. Whoa, a lot of hands in the room are up.
A
For
decent
you in
amount.
the live stream, I hope you also raised your hands.
Right, and we would like to really move towards that being a non-blocking process for the federal government. That may mean that there's more information that needs to come through that. That may mean that there's a little bit more work in terms of, you know, understanding what the process is going to be, you know, on the CSP side to support that. But what we want is to actually change our machine to operate asynchronously, right? To put it in a little bit of an engineering kind of analogy here. And we think that's going to get us more of what we want from a security perspective, and definitely something we'll be interested in working with interested folks on as the year goes on.
And so are you thinking about those changes in the context of moving toward meaningful ConMon in sort of a continuous monitoring paradigm, or are you thinking about SCRs sort of separately from ConMon?
They seem pretty entangled. I mean, there is other work also happening around just, you know, automation and OSCAL in general that I think is going to play into that. I don't know that I have a good, like, real crisp answer to that question exactly. I know that when we want all of our work to be meaningful, right now what's happening with the program is there is a lot of pressure to have its resources used more efficiently so it can scale. And so it could then, so that we can point those resources in the direction of executing on receiving machine readable packages, you know, automating elements of scanning and things that we can do that. So the program right now, more than I think it's ever been, is incentivized to to not waste its own time, much less the time of its CSPs on that sort of thing.
That's wonderful. And so can you share a little bit more generally about how you're thinking in the theme of increasing velocity, moving from sort of a point in time compliance paradigm to a potentially more continuous one?
Yeah, and I think that's really what I was trying to get at with the significant change request process. But I think there's just a broader principle behind that of speed being a security property. One of the things I think that that is happening that is, you know, sort of inherently less visible from the government side is it's not just where we look at the process and it's like we can see it's slow because we measure how long it takes to go from point A to point B. There's the hidden cost of people just silently opting themselves out of the program if they perceive that by signing themselves up for it, they're about to slow their deployment process to molasses, right? And that is something we bear, I think, but it's hard for us to feel that necessarily and measure it. One of our goals is to change that as well and start measuring this stuff a little more effectively.
Mm-hmm. Great. This wouldn't be a discussion about the future without some talk about AI.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, this is meant to be on the agenda. So can you tell me a little bit more about how you're thinking about it? Last Monday, I seem to recall, the Emerging Technology Framework draft proposal, I think comments closed on March 11th. Mm-hmm. How are you, in your role, both thinking about FedRAMP, but also thinking about cloud security compliance broadly across government, thinking about AI and sort of thinking about AI as it relates to the issue you just brought up around acceleration?
Yeah. So I imagine this audience probably does know, but if you don't, we did just close on a public comment period around an emerging technology framework with an initial focus on generative artificial intelligence. It's something that was part of the president's artificial intelligence executive order. The goal of that is to accelerate, be able to have the government a little bit further ahead on the early adopter curve, or at least less on the late adopter curve, for things that are at this point have started to emerge, and we should not be falling behind in people expect, the public expects their government, even though they kind of know in the back of their head that government has this reputation for lagging behind, still when it actually comes to the experience of interacting with the digital service or getting a benefit that they need, their expectations go pretty high pretty quickly. And they want to see the government bringing the tools that they know exist to bear to solve their problems. So, that's one of the fundamental goals there. Obviously, a big goal of this is also to make sure we're doing it in a responsible way. That is the point of the FedRAMP program. Those twin goals are what you are hopefully seeing reflected in that framework. Thank you to everybody who did submit comments. I know we got a lot of them. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head right now, but it was pretty hefty, and that's a good thing. I think one of the things that we're going to be thinking about the most is how to make sure that we are, we put a lot of effort, and including at my level, into thinking about how we are measuring this from like a fairness and performance perspective. So there's a lot of emphasis in the framework, for example, on benchmarking and about what it means to be able to qualify for this process of accelerating your application in the first place. We want to make sure that we want to make sure that products that are coming before the program are actually what we meant to cover, right? That these are examples of relatively recent, performing at a reasonable enough rate to make it worth the government's time, and it actually is generative AI. It is an environment where there's a lot of AI. There's a lot of that being bandied about at the moment. We want to make sure we're focused on the right things. We're not trying to get ourselves into a situation where we are, the government's judge of how good AI is at its job. That's not really what FedRAMP is supposed to do. So that was one of the questions that we prompted the public to help us think through as we went through that. So thank you for those who did. I think at my level, what I give a lot of focus to is where this framework is going, right? It's strategically important and new for the program in general to be prioritizing anything really, and there will be more
as opposed to just the existing
as opposed to just first in, first out, right? But I think people actually do expect that programs like FedRAMP are operated with a bit of strategy in mind, right? And that when the government has clear priorities, FedRAMP, like its other programs, are working in support of those goals. So it is important precedent for us, and I think there'll be more opportunities, especially as we get past some of the initial AI wave, to talk through what some of those other emerging technologies and priorities should be.
That's great. How are you thinking about the relationship between the benchmark controls that FedRAMP looks at and potentially the NIST AI risk management framework or any of the other sort of control families that are sprouting up everywhere across the AI world?
Yeah, it's not a settled space, right? And I think one of the things that I am been conscious of and am perfectly fine saying publicly, is we're not trying to become the NIST-like benchmark of what good performing AI is. That is a role. I mean, NIST plays that role with some other technologies, and we're really focused on making sure that when we are trying to prioritize a certain type of thing, that we are only spending our resources on that type of thing, and that type of thing is just at a kind of a basic professional level. But we fully expect the marketplace of agency customers that are actually the ones buying this and working with it for that to be driving a level of quality across the board.
Great, thank you so much. So what does the future look like for you? You all had this comment period close. Many of us in this room engaged with the draft OMB memo on FedRAMP reform, the comments for which I think were due right before Christmas. Mm-hmm. Can you share a little bit about what 2024 looks like for all things FedRAMP and sort of, I would say, cloud security and compliance in government?
Sure. Yeah, well, big sweeping topic. So, obviously I can't really speak for OMB and what's going to happen with their memorandum, but, this year, you're going to see quite a bit from GSA. You're going to see some more publicly from us with more, I'm starting to talk here in a little bit of detail about some of the things that we're thinking about, right? And you're going to see more of that and more of those things coming out of our mouths on the internet and through the speaking that we're doing. There's also going to be a lot of opportunities to comment or to not just to comment, but to engage with the program and with GSA, more directly on the implementation of those things. One of the things we're really focused on is showing that we can deliver on things. So there's been a lot of effort inside GSA to make sure we're pointing our resources in a direction that we can start showing some tangible value to the things that we're talking about over the next couple of quarters for the things that I think we all understand are our priorities. So we'll have those, and we will be very interested to see people's reaction to those. A lot of those are, there's going to be opportunities for pilots with interested companies, and I hope that you see a pretty good amount of energy in the air, and that you feel the execution engine of our agency pointed in starting to take some of the things that have been talked about in the air for the last year or two, and putting out things into the world.
Well, I hope some companies in this room or some folks on the online are going to raise their hand for some of those pilots. That certainly sounds exciting. I do want to say, in industry, we've really appreciated both the Federal Secure Cloud Advisory Committee that's been stood up, as well as putting things out for public comment. I seem to recall a world in some earlier IT policymaking where things were just sort of released. And so I think the collective brain trust of both the folks here in the room and online who really care about these topics, it is very helpful for us to provide our perspectives about what's going on.
Well, I that's always glad to hear that. And I could tell you, as somebody who has been on the receiving end of multiple public comment periods, where I've read all of these comments and worked with others on different teams who have implemented those, it really does make a difference. And it's, and these can include good ideas that have worked their way up through the process inside large companies, and they can include good ideas that came from individuals who just decided to throw something in. And it's, I think that those processes have really improved the quality of work out of all the organizations, GSA included, that have decided to engage more in that way over the last couple of years, last decade, really.
Awesome, thank you. Sort of looking ahead at this year and sort of the first year, potentially the first term of the Biden administration, how are you thinking about the full spectrum of things that are sort of in flight? You mentioned a handful y'all are about to be releasing here in short order, but on top of that, we've got CMMC, we've got a couple of federal acquisition regulatory rules, plus secure software development, sort of the draft form, I think, was just finalized the other day. How are you thinking about this kaleidoscope of policy, sort of not in your FedRAMP hat, but in your sort of executive director for this as a topic at GSA? How are you thinking about the full suite of changes that are potentially affecting government contractors or government cloud vendors, rather? And thinking about the velocity issue, how do you think all of these rules will affect that?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about it's an interesting time to be working in cybersecurity. And I remember joining the top of the administration right in the middle of doing the cybersecurity executive order, and I think that pace has really, in many ways not stopped. It just moved into different phases. There's not a simple answer to what you're talking about, but I think one of the things we're spending a lot of time doing right now is really, stakeholder coordination with other parts of the federal ecosystem, making sure we have much stronger ties with CISA, with OMB, with NIST, with the organizations that make up this kaleidoscope, right? And it is very natural. It's the natural way of government organizations like other large enterprises to, come together for little bursts and then kind of retreat to their worlds over time. And I'm very focused on trying to build the scaffolding that will keep them tied together like this, so that not that it can solve every problem that companies will encounter as this kaleidoscope unfolds, but that we can make it smoother.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's really great to hear that. Are there any sort of final thoughts? We've got a bunch of folks on the line and a bunch of folks gathered here in the room that deeply care about the topic. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to leave the group with?
If you wanted to take a question or two, if that would be fine.
I think we only have maybe just one question. We have 2 minutes left before they're cutting us off. Okay. Sure. We've got a mic here. Does anyone want to ask Eric Mill a question? All right, we've got one over there.
Is there any consideration for a future, almost like a FedRAMP aid program to help startups achieve FedRAMP authorization faster? Because that's the market that's really expensive to achieve for some of these smaller companies.
Yeah, there is, and I don't want to get ahead some of the details on that, but we have been talking a lot about that. You know, you heard some of my early comments here talked about the sort of inherently we have to engage more with small businesses and smaller organizations that have maybe less of an existing long-time investment in the federal ecosystem. That's something that's really top of our minds. I think one of the dynamics that has been present in a FedRAMP ecosystem that was originally optimized around IaaS and PaaS providers, in my view, is that it pointed a lot of resources towards the things that will just be, that themselves will be reused as widely as possible, right? Things that you can imagine just about every agency may be needing to use. And that's come at the cost of some things that are, you know, maybe sector specific, right? There are fields out there that are extremely useful to organizations that work in healthcare or in energy. And, you know, I think there's a heavy overlap between that and what you're talking about. And so for a couple of reasons, we are very much looking at programmatic activities we could do to proactively get out there and try to help lower that barrier and introduce people to what they'll need to do to both make it sound less intimidating and hopefully be less intimidating.
I don't know if we have time for one more question. Maybe. I don't know the powers that be. All right. Right over here. This is the actual last question.
You can repeat this.
Oh.
I guess. So, Eric, thank you for talking. What resources does GSA and the program do? We understand what we need from industry, but industry also wants to listen to you and help advocate for ways to help this program do exactly what you're saying that it's hoping to do in the future. So what do you need? What resources do you need that we can advocate for on your behalf?
Well, you can appreciate the complexity of giving a real detailed answer to that question here as a government person, but you know, right now there's very much focus on making sure that we are able to begin delivering on the things that we have been saying that we will deliver for some time, and the things that people are very visibly wanting us to deliver on. And we want to show too that we can do that with the resources we have and that we've been getting. And that does not preclude at all the fact that like FedRAMP in fact could be doing a lot more than it is. And I think one of the themes that you can see in, for example, the OMB memorandum, but also in the law and in other in everything else that's happening, there's much more work starting to center around the program at GSA. And you know, this concept of capacity being for authorizations being spread around the government is not going away. Something we're very much leaning into more to make sure that we have higher throughput overall. But there's just a much higher set of expectations on the program, and if everybody wants like something out of FedRAMP, there's really only one place you can go and try to just get them to do it, and it's there. So that will be you know, an eternal journey, I'm sure, that would absolutely, you know, we will love to work with you.
And I'll just say that I think, in fact, your move from the White House over to the program is actually a manifestation of the administration's desire to continue to deliver results. So with that, please join me in thanking Eric Mill for taking time out of his busy schedule to come home.